HOA, bulldozed my orchard, claiming it was abandoned property. My grandfather was a farmer who owned several acres of land on what used to be the outskirts of town. When he passed away 15 years ago, he left me a 2-acre plot with an orchard he'd cultivated for decades. The land had about 30 fruit trees, apple, pear, cherry, and plum, many of which were rare heritage varieties he'd grafted himself. That orchard was his pride and joy, and maintaining it became mine too. As our town grew, developers started building housing developments all around the old farmland. 5 years ago, a fancy subdivision called Evergreen Estates went up next to my property. The developer tried to buy my land, but I refused. The orchard was my connection to my grandfather, and those trees produced the best fruit you've ever tasted. Plus, I ran a small business selling jams and preserves made from the fruit at our local farmers market. The HOA board of Evergreen Estates never liked having my agricultural eyesore next to their precious community. Karen Wilson, the HOA president, would regularly send me complaint letters about fallen fruit attracting wildlife or leaves blowing onto their pristine lawns. I always responded politely but firmly that my property wasn't part of their HOA, and their rules didn't apply to me. Last spring, I had to travel overseas for work, a 3-month consulting project in Japan that I couldn't turn down. Before leaving, I hired Tom, a local landscaper, to maintain the orchard while I was gone. I also informed my closest neighbors and left emergency contact information with them. When I returned home, I nearly had a heart attack. My beautiful orchard, my grandfather's legacy, was gone. Every single tree had been bulldozed. The entire plot was nothing but churned up earth and splintered stumps. I literally fell to my knees and started crying. My neighbor Susan came running over when she saw me. "Oh, thank God you're back. We've been trying to reach you for weeks," she exclaimed. "That horrible HOA. They just came in with bulldozers one day, claiming your property was abandoned and posed a health hazard. Tom tried to stop them, but they threatened to call the police on him for trespassing." I was in shock, but that quickly turned to rage. I called Tom, who was beside himself with guilt even though none of this was his fault. They showed up with some official-looking paperwork claiming they had legal authority to clear abandoned property, he explained. I took pictures and videos of everything, including their trucks and workers. I also saved all the threatening emails they sent me. My next call was to my cousin Rachel, who happens to be a real estate attorney. She was livid when I told her what happened. "They had absolutely no legal right to touch your property," she fumed. "This is going to cost them dearly." The very next morning, Rachel and I marched into the HOA's monthly meeting. Karen Wilson's smug face turned pale when she saw me. "Oh, you've returned," she said with fake concern. "We had to take action for community safety. Your abandoned orchard was attracting vermin, and—" "Save it," Rachel cut in, slapping down her business card. "I'm his attorney. You illegally destroyed private property worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Here's what's going to happen." What followed was the most satisfying legal battle of my life. We filed suit against both the HOA and individual board members for 1. Trespassing, 2. Destruction of private property, 3. Loss of business income from my farmers market sales, 4. Emotional distress, 5. Punitive damages. We had everything documented: property deeds, business records, Tom's photos and videos, statements from neighbors, and even security camera footage from Susan's house showing the illegal demolition. The HOA's official paperwork turned out to be completely fabricated. They had literally forged municipal documents. Karen tried to claim they had acted in good faith based on complaints about property neglect. But we had Tom's detailed maintenance logs and photos showing the orchard was perfectly maintained. We also had documentation of all their previous harassment about the orchard, proving this was a calculated act of malice. Their lawyer desperately tried to settle out of court, but I refused. I wanted this on public record. The trial lasted 5 days, and it was beautiful. The judge was clearly appalled by the HOA's actions. When Karen tried to argue that they were protecting property values, the judge cut her off. "Mrs. Wilson," he said sternly, You deliberately destroyed decades-old heritage fruit trees on property you knew wasn't under your jurisdiction. Your actions weren't just illegal, they were vindictive and cruel. The verdict came down like Thor's hammer. $450,000 for the destruction of the trees, including treble damages under our state's timber theft laws, $200,000 for loss of business income, $100,000 for emotional distress, $500,000 in punitive damages. Plus, they had to pay all legal fees. The total came to over $1.3 million. The HOA's insurance refused to cover it since the action was intentional and involved forged documents. This meant the HOA had to levy a massive special assessment on all homeowners to pay the judgment. The aftermath was spectacular. At the next HOA election, every board member was voted out. Karen tried to sell her house and move away, but property values in Evergreen Estates had tanked because of the huge special assessment. The new HOA board issued a formal apology and implemented strict rules about board member conduct. But the best part? I used part of the settlement money to restore the orchard, with some improvements. I hired an expert arborist who helped me source heritage varieties matching my grandfather's original trees. I also built a beautiful fence, up to code and properly permitted, and installed security cameras. The new trees will take years to mature, but I'm patient. I also used some of the money to start a proper small business selling my jams and preserves. I even hired Tom to work for me full-time, maintaining the orchard and helping with production. Every time I see Karen walking her dog past my property, deliberately averting her eyes from my newly planted trees, I smile. My grandfather taught me that good things take time to grow, and that includes justice. The ultimate irony? Property values in the surrounding non-HOA neighborhoods have gone up because people heard about what happened and decided they'd rather live somewhere without an HOA. Several Evergreen Estates residents have told me they're trying to legally dissolve their HOA entirely. I still miss my grandfather's original trees, and no amount of money can truly replace them. But I like to think he'd be proud of how I handled this. His orchard may have been temporarily destroyed, but its legacy lives on stronger than ever. And somewhere, I hope he's laughing about how his trees helped take down the very thing he always warned me about, as he used to say, "Son, never trust anybody who thinks they have the right to tell you what to do with your own land." Last week, I donated several heritage fruit tree saplings to our local school's gardening program. The kids were fascinated by the grafting process and the idea of preserving rare fruit varieties. In a way, my grandfather's wisdom and love for agriculture is spreading to a new generation. Karen and her HOA goons thought they could erase his legacy, but they only made it stronger. I still have the farmer's market stand, though it's much bigger now. While my new trees are growing, I've partnered with other local orchards to keep the business going. People specifically seek out my stand, not just for the preserves but to show support. The community's response has been overwhelming. Tom has become an invaluable partner in the business. His dedication during the crisis proved his worth, and he's as passionate about the orchard as I am. We're even experimenting with new grafting techniques and planning to add some exotic fruit varieties once the original trees are established. The legal case has become something of a precedent in our state. Rachel tells me it's now cited in other cases involving HOA overreach. Several law firms have contacted me about consulting on similar cases, and I've been happy to help. Every HOA takedown is a victory for property owners everywhere. I've had people ask if I regret not selling to the developers years ago. The answer is absolutely not. This land represents something more important than money. It's about heritage, passion, and standing up to bullies who think they can steamroll over anyone who doesn't fit their cookie-cutter vision of suburban life. The new HOA board has been remarkably different. They've actually reached out to collaborate on community initiatives. We're planning a neighborhood harvest festival this fall, where residents can learn about heritage fruits and traditional preservation methods. Even some of Karen's former supporters have admitted they were wrong and apologized. It's funny how things work out. Karen and her cronies thought they were eliminating an eyesore, but their actions ended up transforming my small hobby orchard into a thriving business and community landmark. The property they wanted to erase is now protected by case law and celebrated by the very community they claim to be protecting. My grandfather always said that fruit trees teach patience and perseverance. You plant them for the next generation, he'd tell me. I didn't fully understand what he meant until now. This whole experience has shown me that fighting for what's right, even when it's difficult, plants seeds of change that benefit everyone. The security cameras haven't caught any HOA shenanigans since the case, but they've captured lots of wildlife returning to the orchard, birds, butterflies, even a family of deer. Nature is healing, as they say. Every new blossom and budding fruit is a small victory, a reminder that you can't keep a good thing down. I've started keeping a journal documenting the orchard's revival, complete with photos and notes about each tree's progress. Someday, I'll pass this land on to my own children or a worthy successor, along with the story of how their great-grandfather's orchard survived and thrived despite everything thrown at it. The whole experience has taught me valuable lessons about standing up for what's right, the importance of good documentation, and the power of community support. It's also shown me that sometimes the worst actions by others can lead to the best opportunities for growth and positive change. As I sit here writing this, I can see the young trees swaying in the breeze, their leaves catching the sunlight just like their predecessors did. They're smaller than the old ones, but they're growing stronger every day. Kind of like justice, it might take time to bear fruit, but when it does, the harvest is sweet indeed. Update. It's been 2 years since I posted about the HOA destroying my grandfather's orchard, and a lot has happened. Many of you have asked for an update, so here it is. First, the legal aftermath went exactly as we hoped. After the initial verdict, Karen and 3 other former board members tried to appeal, claiming the damages were excessive. The appeals court not only upheld the original judgment, but also added $50,000 in additional legal fees for what they called a frivolous appeal. The criminal case was even more satisfying. Remember those forged municipal documents? The district attorney's office got involved after our civil case exposed the forgery. Karen and the former HOA secretary are now facing criminal charges for document fraud. Their trial is next month, and my attorney says they're looking at possible jail time. The financial fallout hit Evergreen Estates hard. The special assessment to pay my judgment averaged $15,000 per household. About 20 homeowners sued the former board members personally for breaching their fiduciary duty. Those cases were settled out of court, but I heard the board members had to sell off assets to pay up. Karen finally managed to sell her house, but at a 40% loss. The best part? The new owners are a lovely Vietnamese family who've converted their entire front yard into a vegetable garden, completely within the new HOA guidelines, of course. Karen nearly had an aneurysm when she drove by and saw it during her final property inspection. As for my orchard, it's thriving beyond my wildest expectations. Those heritage saplings took to the soil amazingly well. The arborist says they're growing faster than normal, probably because of the rich soil left from the old trees. We've already had our first small harvest from the early producing varieties. Tom and I have expanded the business significantly. Remember how I mentioned starting a proper preserves company? Well, Grandfather's Legacy Preserves is now sold in specialty stores across 3 states. We've hired 4 full-time employees and are looking to expand. The story of the orchard's destruction and rebirth has become part of our brand, and people love it. The new HOA has become an unexpected ally. They've completely reorganized their governance structure to prevent any future abuse of power. Now, any action affecting non-HOA property requires unanimous board approval, plus a 75% vote from all homeowners. They've also created an independent oversight committee that includes non-HOA neighbors. And yes, I'm one of them. Last month, we hosted our 2nd annual Heritage Fruit Festival. Over 500 people attended, including reporters from 2 major newspapers. We had workshops on fruit tree cultivation, preserving techniques, and even a special presentation on the history of heritage orchards in our region. The local historical society has designated my property as a cultural agricultural heritage site, which adds another layer of protection against future interference. The legal impact of our case continues to grow. 3 other states have cited it in similar cases involving HOA overreach. Rachel, my cousin/attorney, has become something of an expert in HOA abuse cases. She's even writing a book about property rights and the limits of HOA authority, using my case as the central example. Remember those school kids I mentioned? They've started a Future Farmers and Gardeners Club, and we host them monthly for hands-on lessons in the orchard. Last week, they harvested their first batch of apples from the trees they helped plant 2 years ago. Watching their faces light up when they tasted the fruit, well, it reminded me of my grandfather. The criminal investigation into the HOA's actions revealed even more corruption. Turns out Karen and her cronies had been embezzling from the HOA maintenance fund for years. They used the money for personal expenses while neglecting actual maintenance. That's partly why they were so desperate to keep control of the board. The FBI got involved because some of the fraud crossed state lines, and now they're facing federal charges too. My security system caught something interesting last week. Karen's husband trying to sneak onto my property at night. The cameras got clear footage of him approaching with what looked like a container of weed killer. I called the police and he was arrested for attempted vandalism. His excuse? I was just walking my dog. At 2 a.m. with a garden sprayer. Sure, buddy. The arrest violated Karen's bail conditions. They were ordered to stay away from my property. So now she's in even more trouble. Her lawyer dropped her case, and she's had to hire a public defender. Karma really is something. I've used some of the settlement money to create a legal defense fund for other property owners facing HOA abuse. So far, we've helped 3 families successfully fight back against illegal HOA actions. One case involved an elderly couple whose HOA tried to force them to remove their wheelchair ramp. Another was a family threatened with fines for having a vegetable garden. We won both cases. The business has grown so much that we've bought the adjacent 5 acres that used to belong to another farmer. We're expanding the orchard and building a proper commercial kitchen for our preserves production. The best part? The land was being eyed by the same developer who tried to buy my original plot. They showed up with another offer, and I had the pleasure of saying no again. Tom has become a full partner in the business. His expertise has been invaluable, and he's as passionate about preserving heritage fruits as I am. We've started a seed and cutting exchange program with other heritage orchards across the country. Next spring, we're adding some rare apple varieties that haven't been commercially grown in over a century. The media attention from our case has had an unexpected benefit. People are discovering the importance of protecting agricultural heritage. 2 other communities in our state have passed ordinances specifically protecting historic orchards and farms from development pressure. A state senator has even introduced a bill, nicknamed the Heritage Protection Act, inspired by our case. Last month, I received a letter from a National Agricultural Preservation Society. They're giving me their annual award for leadership in agricultural heritage protection. The ceremony is in Washington, D.C., and I'm bringing Tom and Rachel with me. We're also stopping by some heritage orchards on the East Coast to exchange cultivation techniques and cuttings. The old HOA board members have become social pariahs in the community. None of them can get elected to anything, not even the library board. Karen's attempt to join a nearby country club was rejected. Apparently, nobody wants a criminally charged HOA tyrant in their organization. She tried to play the victim in a local Facebook group, but people just posted pictures of my bulldozed orchard in response. The most vindicated I've felt was when the current HOA president asked me to help draft their new landscaping guidelines. We've included provisions for fruit trees, vegetable gardens, and other agricultural features as long as they're properly maintained. Several homeowners have already planted fruit trees, and we're helping them learn proper care techniques. My grandfather's old farming journals have become a valuable resource. I've had them digitized and shared copies with agricultural libraries and preservation societies. His detailed notes on grafting techniques and soil management have helped other heritage orchards succeed. It's like his knowledge is having a second life. The criminal trials start next month. The prosecutors have asked me to testify about the impact of the destruction and the pattern of harassment that led up to it. Rachel says my testimony isn't really necessary. They have overwhelming evidence, but I want to face them in court. I want them to see that they didn't break me. They just made me stronger. We're breaking ground on a new building next week, a combination store, museum, and education center. It'll have displays about the history of heritage orchards, a retail space for our products, and classrooms for workshops. The architect has designed it to look like a modern version of a traditional barn, and we're using sustainable materials and solar power. The most rewarding part of all this has been the community that's grown around the orchard. We have regular volunteers who help with maintenance and harvest. Local chefs come to us for fruit for their restaurants. School groups visit to learn about agriculture and conservation. It's become more than just my grandfather's legacy. It's a living piece of our community's heritage. Looking back, I realized the HOA did me a favor. If they hadn't tried to destroy the orchard, it would still be my private hobby. Now it's a thriving business, an educational resource, and a symbol of standing up to bullies. Sometimes the best revenge is success. I got an interesting call last week from a Hollywood producer who wants to make a movie about our story. I turned them down. This isn't about getting famous. It's about protecting what matters and showing that ordinary people can stand up to corruption and win. The orchard is more alive than ever. Every tree that blooms is a testament to perseverance. Every jar of preserves we sell helps preserve not just fruit, but a way of life that's worth protecting. My grandfather used to say that the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, and the second best time is now. I think he'd be proud to see how his wisdom has borne fruit in ways he never could have imagined. And Karen? Last I heard, she's moving to Arizona after her sentencing next month. Apparently, she's found a retirement community with no HOA. Imagine that.